has a strong and rooted influence on modern Italian culture and has manifested in the creativity of the tabletop role-playing games coming out today. Back in the 70s and 80s, Japanese animation flooded Italian television. Lupin III, Goldorak/Goldrake, Heidi, Girl of the Alps. These all had fully original Italian theme songs, were fully dubbed in Italian, and nationally broadcast for free across the country. These weren't exotic shows or late-night imports as they were in a lot of other places, though they were heavily censored at first, but these were just the regular afternoon cartoons to multiple generations of Italian children. By the time fantasy stories arrived in other forms, Italians were already fluent in different types of melodrama, stylized heroes, tragic villains, emotional arcs, and stakes that escalated from small personal moments to the end of the world. When tabletop role-playing games arrived, they didn't land in a culture that was raised in wargaming and number crunching, but rather a generation that was more fixated on story, plot, and world building because they were used to the fantasy fiction of comics and anime. Hey everyone, welcome to Weird Place. My name is Lee, and today we are going to Italy to learn about their RPG culture and the great games that are coming out of there these days. So a little context about Italy first. Italy is a very culturally diverse country due to the distinctive geographical regions. Italian fiction has always been very much inward-facing first. Italian cinema was made for Italians, spaghetti westerns, giallo horror, genre films that were filled with a lot of shared assumptions and cultural shorthand that only Italians would understand. When a lot of these works traveled outside Italy, they didn't always translate cleanly, and we'll see the same thing happen with RPGs. But as usual, Dungeons & Dragons was the first RPG to arrive in Italy. The 1983 Red Box was translated and released in Italy in 1985. For many Italians, this wasn't just the first RPG, but it was their first exposure to the idea of role-playing. However, Italy did miss a lot of what shaped RPG culture in other places. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the first edition, was never translated, only AD&D second edition. Traveler didn't arrive until 1998, and I don't think it was that popular. RuneQuest didn't get there until 2006. There were a lot of games that taught different styles of play, different assumptions about agency, improv, and shared narrative that never made it to the Italian market from the very beginning of the RPG boom. There were some original Italian games that did exist, like Catacumbas, which was released in 1985, just ahead of the release of D&D. It is considered the first domestic Italian RPG, and it's a game that's inspired by medieval Italian history and tradition and folklore rather than generic Tolkien fantasy. There was another game developed domestically at around the same time called I Signori del Caos, but it was released a couple months later and never quite had as much recognition or impact on the legacy of Italian RPGs. Despite all of these things, D&D was still the real victor. It was the one to spread the hobby nationwide. Once other companies saw the economic potential of RPGs, there were other translations and localizations that followed. Germany's Das Schwarze Auge, or The Black Eye, arrived in 1986, Call of Cthulhu localization in 1990. There was a Middle-earth role-playing game that was translated in 1990 as well. Cyberpunk 2020, also in the same year, and that became the first real successful science fiction RPG in Italy. The early 90s was truly the golden age of RPGs. There was Stormbringer, Star Wars, Cult, GURPS, Vampire the Masquerade. Hype was all over the place. RPGs were really hitting their stride. Vampire in particular took hold in a way that I feel like only kind of happens to very Catholic places. It ended up becoming the second most popular Italian role-playing game, right behind D&D, and almost surpassed D&D when it first released in the 90s. At the same time, original Italian games began to appear a bit more frequently. Some found modest success, though none could truly rival the blockbusters that were dominating the shelves like the mainstream D&D and Vampire. In 1993, Lex Arcana was released, and it's a game about investigating supernatural ongoings in an alternate universe where the Roman Empire never fell. And it did do well commercially, just not quite as well as D&D and Vampire and the like. But I think it was an early sign that some something Italy would later be known for in their RPGs, which is drawing from its own past and myths and culture instead of drawing on these borrowed fantasy world. However, by the late 90s, just like in most other markets, the momentum slowed and the RPG market hit a standstill. Collectible card games like Magic the Gathering exploded in popularity.
The game's Magic the Gathering, and all you need to play is a brain, a deck, and a friend.
Video games were also on the scene and they were getting really popular, so RPG sales naturally declined. The local and domestic scene fragmented and started to lose momentum, with D&D that was kind of the only thing keeping the scene afloat up until the early mid-2000s. And this idea of living in the shadow of a world that's been lost, of trying to build something meaningful in the ruins of something that's been fragmented, is a really powerful theme in a lot of modern tabletop RPG design, like today's sponsor for a portion of today's video. Motive Knight, a game about resisting oppression in an early modern age of gunpowder, alchemy, and intangible demons. The war to stop the demon conquest was fought and lost generations ago, but as a Motive Knight, the supernatural powers of your awakened soul make you one of the few people capable of standing up to their tyranny. Imagine the age of exploration if every nation in the world was a dystopian hellscape, and you are playing the impoverished, outnumbered underdogs trying to make the world at least a little less awful. Motive Knight is built on a D20-based system where you aren't railroaded by a class or an archetype. Instead, everything is a skill, and you are the one that's in control of what skills your character learns and which skills they improve as their story unfolds. So whether it's combat, conversation, or your mastery of the supernatural, it's always up to you to decide how your character grows. The full rulebook is available now on DriveThruRPG for just $10 US. What a steal! You can also get a free adventure and sample characters on motiveknight.com if you want to just dive in and learn as you go. So please check it out today. Links are all in the description. Thank you so much, Motive Knight, for sponsoring today's video. That shift from consuming games to thinking seriously about what RPGs can say is exactly what starts to happen in Italy in the years to follow. And this brings us to a very important institution in Italian role-playing culture, the Gioco di ruolo dell'anno. I'm sorry again for butchering your language, I'm doing my best. Or as we can safely call it, the Role-Playing Game of the Year award. Or it used to be called the Best in Show. So this is a prestigious award that has been announced at Lucca Comics and Games, which is now the second largest comic and game convention in the world. This convention was founded originally in 1965, and it used to be called the Salone Internazionale dei Comics, or the International Congress of Comics. In 1992, the Salone was held for the last time, and in 93, it officially became Lucca Comics. In 1995, it then became Lucca Comics and Games, and that's what it's still known as today. In 1996, it was held in Lucca for the first time, which is a medieval walled city and held in the town square. Lucca Comics and Games transforms the entire historic town into the convention. There is no convention center, there's no building that you go into, but literally the entire town is filled with comic stuff, role-playing games, and other tabletop things for a couple of days. The Best of Show award is an Italian gaming industry award that was awarded at Lucca Comics since 1993 and has now been called the Gioco di ruolo dell'anno, with the first award being given to the Italian localization of Call of Cthulhu. So for decades, the Italian Role-Playing Game of the Year award, or the Best in Show, favored localizations rather than original games like Dungeons & Dragons and Warhammer. They all won the award. But in 2018, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition was up against a bunch of other indie games and localizations and was definitely expected to win the award. However, the jury actually gave the award to a game called Lovecraft-esque, a GM-less horror game by a UK-based studio, Black Armada Games, and localized by Narrativa. So Narrativa is a company that's been on the scene for a while and had already won multiple awards for their previous localizations, including Apocalypse World in 2011. So their version of Lovecraft-esque was completely remade for the Italian market, starting from the outside. The book itself is like a white book with a single eldritch rune on the cover. But then when you shine a UV light on the book, the entire book glows, and there's like eldritch runes and like tentacles and stuff that's coming out of it, and it's an absolutely gorgeous looking book. This book won that award. And even though this decision was very controversial and there was a lot of outburst from the community at the time, the jury's reasoning was that because D&D had only translated the player's handbook and not the monster manual, so they ruled that it was just an incomplete game in Italian. Whether Lovecraft-esque's actual transformation of that game mattered to the jury, we don't know. But I think a game like that beating out D&D for a prestigious award like this is pretty transformative in the Italian history of role-playing games. The following year, in 2019, an Italian game called Household won from Italian studio Two Little Mice. This was the first time that an Italian game had won the award since ZineQuest in 2003. This shift reflects a broader pattern, I think, for the legacy of RPGs in Italy. Italian publishers really mastered localization first. Janus Design, which then turned into Grumpy Bear stuff, Narrativa, Need Games. For them, all of these companies, translation and localization was merely the first step into the market. A little side note, localization is very much different from translation because localization really changes a lot of the content culturally to fit that specific market. And so these companies also learned that in order to market Italian ideas internationally after learning how to transform international ideas into Italian. Need Games localized Vampire and Cyberpunk Red before publishing their first game, Fabula Ultima. And Fabula Ultima was actually written in English first and then translated into Italian for the Italian market. That might be partially why it's done so well internationally. If you don't know what Fabula Ultima is, it is basically the ultimate JRPG in tabletop format. It's inspired by games like Final Fantasy and written by Emanuele Galetto. It won the RPG Game of the Year award, and it was pretty much an overnight success. They also recently had a crowdfund for a new edition last year, and Yoshitaka Amano, the illustrator for the original Final Fantasy series, even did exclusive art for the next edition of the cover. So going back to Italy's familiarity with anime, maybe an entire generation of creators were inspired by these afternoon cartoons, and now we have gems like Fabula Ultima and Twilight Sword coming out from these Italian creators. Mana Project Studio has even brought a Cowboy Bebop RPG to life, and also recently crowdfunded a Ghost in the Shell RPG. Narrativa has also been bringing Japanese games to Italy for years. A lot of indie RPGs that aren't even available in English yet. Games like Gloria, La Foresta Incantata, which is a indie Japanese RPG, and Necronica as well. And also Need Games even has a officially licensed Pokemon Arceus adventure for Fabula Ultima that's available only in Italian. Since 2020, Italians and Italian games have received almost 30 nominations at the ENnie Awards across all the categories. Product of the Year alone tells a very compelling story about the quality of Italian games these days. Brancalonia was nominated for Product of the Year in 2021. Fabula Ultima, Household, and Broken Tales, all nominated in 2023, Outgunned and Not the End in 2024, and most recently, Memento Mori, the Deathless Edition in 2025. Studios like Two Little Mice, Horrible Guild, Archeron Games, Mana Project Studio, and Need Games are all no longer just importing and localizing foreign games, though they are still actively bringing to Italy all of the big indies like Blades in the Dark, Morkborg, and Monster Hearts, which apparently is very popular there. They are really shaping the top tier of the RPG hobby today. Italian creators are winning awards for cartography, for monster design, rules innovation, and production quality. It's all across the board, honestly. The way that Italians typically like to play is generally at home in person with their friends, and less so online, from what I could find. But there has been also the emergence of ludotecas, which are like a game cafe where there's like a library of board and RPG games for you to rent and play. And some of these are part of like an establishment like a bar or something, but there are some that are just basically a space that you can go and take a game and play. Some of these spaces are publicly funded with the creation of nonprofit associations that coordinate with local governments to open up these large shared play spaces, and can even host things like a convention. So there was a convention called TPK, Total Party Con, a convention dedicated entirely to OSR games in Italy, was hosted in one of these spaces with an association in Milan last year. OSR is actually a thriving community in Italy with the creation of the OSR Pizza Alliance in 2021. It's a union of communities and players that are in the Italian OSR scene with the goal of just sharing the love of OSR games and trying to get more people into the scene. The indie scene is also really thriving in Italy, and they have a lot of great games like Green Oaks, which is a game where you're all senior citizens living in a possibly haunted retirement home. Another recent-ish development in the tabletop scene is the GDRdA, which is basically a RPG blind date. This company has been setting them up in multiple cities across Italy, and you show up without knowing what game you're gonna play, and you play a one-shot with a GM that was organized and run by the company. So you basically just get to show up and play a new game, and I think the only rule is that the one-shot will be not the same one-shot that has been played in that location before. So if you go to the same location multiple times, you'll always be playing something different, and it really keeps the variety flowing. I think it's a really great initiative to try new games and to simply just play more. Italian players rarely define themselves by just a single system. Board games, card games, RPGs also all blend together, especially at a festival called Play, or Festival del Gioco, which is Italy's largest convention dedicated to just games. And it's rapidly becoming the best convention to go to for tabletop role-playing, especially if you're open to stepping outside of the mainstream games. Apparently, Lucca Games and Comics has become a little bit too mainstream these days. So Play not only has tabletop games, but it's a celebration of all kinds of play. It's got games of every kind: board games, collectible card games, video games, live games, 3D games, everything that you can think of. Perhaps the familiarity of different styles of storytelling, like from the anime boom in the 70s and 80s, really created an open-mindedness in a whole generation, or multiple generations, that really creates a fertile ground for innovation. And I think maybe that's why they're coming out with such incredible tabletop role-playing games. Not only were Italians used to foreign and different types of storytelling, but they also knew how to turn it into something of their own and take their spin on it. Everything in Italy tends to be dubbed and not subbed, and you know, they recorded their own original theme songs for a lot of the animes and stuff.
Invincibili guerrieri, valenti condottieri, votati anima e corpo a Lady Isabel.
And I think we can also start to see this similarity in RPGs. Italy really knows how to make something that they were familiar with and put a spin on it and turn it into something that's marketable for the entire world. For a while, Italy wasn't really a major player in the TTRPG scene internationally, but now Italian games are everywhere on the market, and I think we're going to be getting a lot more great hits from them for a while to come. Thank you everyone for watching this video. Thank you for sticking around, and I'm sorry again for butchering the Italian language. Let us know in the comments, what's your favorite Italian TTRPG? Or if you have experience playing games in Italy, let us know what it's like. Huge thank you as always to you for watching, and to all of our lovely patrons. Thank you so much for continuing to support us, and I hope you all really enjoyed this brief dive into the culture of Italian tabletop role-playing games. And if you want to learn more about the tabletop scene in Italy, I recommend an article from Thomas Manuel on Rascal News about the games in Italy, where I got a lot of this information from. It's a great read if you want to learn more, and so the link will be in the description, as is the link for Motive Night. Don't forget to check it out. So thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. It really helps us out, and we will see you in the next one. Attenzione, pickpocket.
Attenzione!